Rain fell over Boston like an ancient language drumming relentlessly on the tin roofs of the prefab buildings behind Lincoln High. Natalie Moore, 26. An art teacher stayed behind in classroom 204, long after the clock had slipped past 11. The watercolor projects still smelled faintly of wet paper. The students' charcoal pencils had left gray smudges along the edge of the tables, and I was still searching for the right kind of gentle truth to write in my notes. Skin tone is too calm, eyes lack focus, and the background needs a quieter space. The fluorescent lights flickered once, then went still. At night, the school had a strange silence, every sound stretched echoing longer than it should. I gathered the paintings, slid them into my worn leather tote, and stepped into the hallway. The bulletin board was plastered with faded posters last month's homecoming, the basketball team's 1-point loss, like memories taped up for temporary safekeeping. Just as my hand touched the glass door at the main exit, I heard it a sharp crack, then another, then a series. My first instinct wasn't fear, it was denial. My brain tried to name it a car backfiring a trash can falling over. No. Gunshots. Out in the parking lot. I pressed myself flat against the wall, peering through the narrow slit of glass. Rain slashed across the scene, but the headlights cut through just enough for me to see figures moving between the teachers' sedans. A black SUV sat at an angle, its rear camera pointed deliberately toward the gate. Someone had collapsed near the front wheel. The man still standing wiped his hands on a white cloth slowly, methodically, as if he were finishing a meal, not a murder. My keys slipped from my hand. The tiny metallic clink rang out like a fire alarm. Everything outside stopped. The man turned his face, lifting toward the building. I couldn't breathe. That feeling of being seen not by a pair of eyes, but by something colder, sharper, hit the back of my neck like ice. I ran. My heels skidded on the polished tiles, heart pounding like a drum in a hollow room. The hallway seemed endless. I turned left into the girls' restroom at the far end, the saddest place in the entire school, always lit too brightly. I slammed the door shut, twisted the lock, and pressed my back against the metal. The smell of chlorine and cheap soap clung to my skin. Outside footsteps. Not rushed, not erratic, measured like a metronome. My hand fumbled for my phone. No signal. Of course, these old walls were thick enough to be a bunker. I crawled into the last stall, locked it, and stood on the toilet seat, tucking my feet up. My hand went to my mouth on instinct. I hated how much I resembled a cliché from a low-budget thriller, but the body is always more intelligent than the mind. A soft metallic click. The lock was turned, not broken, but picked clean, precise, professional. The lights went out. Darkness swallowed the room, except for the muffled sound of rain pounding on the small window above. I know you're here. The voice was low, steady, not threatening, not hurried. It carried a strange accent that didn't belong anywhere I could name. Maybe because it wasn't shaped by geography, it was carved by authority. You saw something you weren't supposed to see. I said nothing. He stepped closer. His shoes made almost no sound. I'm not here to hurt you, but I need to know what you saw, and I must decide how to keep you safe based on how much you already know. Silence stretched between us, taking on shape and weight. I unlocked the stall and stepped out, hands raised to my chest, not my head. I didn't want to look like a criminal. I tried to look like someone keeping her dignity. The glow from his phone lit my face, then his. I didn't know what kind of man I'd expected, a scarred thug maybe, but not this. A black suit tailored so perfectly it seemed to move with him. A tie knotted sharp as a blade. Dark hair slicked back, gray eyes pale and hard as tempered glass. Raindrops clung to his lashes, yet he looked as if he'd never truly been wet. Natalie Moore. He said my name as if it weighed nothing. 26. Apartment 3B Maple Street. Annual income $38,000. Credit card debt 17. 12-year-old Toyota is overdue for service twice. Who are you? My voice tried to sound steady. It wasn't. Charles Hernandez. No title, just a name dropped like a verdict. The man outside didn't die from impulse. He was a piece of code I had to delete before it burned the entire system. A human code. A faint smile touched his mouth. In my world, action always comes before language. I stepped back. I'll call the police. You can. Then you'll have to describe a license plate that'll be changed by morning. You'll identify a face with a lawyer and a doctor ready to swear it belonged to someone else, complete with medical records dated a month ago. You'll leave the station with a new shadow following you home. By tomorrow night, there'll be a small scratch on your window frame and an empty envelope beneath it. You're threatening me. I'm describing reality. He spoke like someone reading a lab report. You don't have to believe me. But you should understand this is the moment you choose a side. And if you want to live, you'd better choose the side with visible power. The rain pounded harder, a steady hum like an air conditioner. And suddenly I realized something strange. My fear hadn't vanished around him. It had simply changed color. It wasn't a shapeless panic anymore. It had texture now. It could be held examined, negotiated. What do you want from me? Legal silence? He looked at me directly. Silence that no court can subpoena. No journalist can pry from you. I can make that silence lawful and loud enough to warn others not to cross the line. How? The light from his phone carved a thin edge along his cheekbone. Leave this place, now. After that, I'll make my proposal. You'll have one night to decide. We exited through the emergency door. The parking lot had turned into a slick abstraction, rainwashing every trace away. My old sedan was replaced by a black armored sedan, its interior glow warm enough to lull me to sleep. He opened the door with an almost old-fashioned courtesy, his hand resting lightly against my back. Not pushing, not pulling, just confirming that I was moving forward. Inside it smelled of new leather and faint wood polish, the city streaked past in ribbons of red and blue neon from 24-hour stores. I caught my reflection in the window at a version of myself I didn't recognize. Eyes wider, shoulders, straighter mouth, no longer trembling. Who are you, really? I asked again. Sometimes the truth only surfaces when the question is repeated. He didn't look at me. A man who once believed everything had a price until tonight. And I'm what? The new entry on your balance sheet? You're the exception that makes every reliable equation recalculate. He turned to me, eyes meeting mine. I need to keep you alive. Not out of morality, out of strategy. And he paused like a sculptor gauging the perfect angle for a final cut, because I've discovered something far more dangerous than any enemy, the urge to make you look at me a second time. The car merged onto the highway. An old Chet Baker jazz tune played softly on the radio, a breathing exercise in melody. The blood rushing in my ears began to quiet. You know what an ordinary person would do right now? I asked. Cry. Or pray. And I'm thinking about colors. He laughed quietly, unexpectedly. What colors? The wet gray of Boston in the rain, the glossy black of your car, and the white cloth that wiped away something no one dares to name. I keep wondering if we mix them, do we get a color of compromise or surrender? You'll have your answer by morning. How? With the offer. I'm about to lay on your table. He didn't say marriage, spousal privilege, or legal protection, but every syllable landed like chess pieces already arranged. I only had to make one move to see the whole board. The door opened when the car stopped under the awning of a building overlooking the Charles River. Damp wind rushed in. A silver-haired woman, Elena Morales, was waiting. Her gaze flicked past me to the rain behind, assessing, calculating. Your temporary apartment is paid for 3 months, Charles said. Your car keys are in the honker parking spot B12. No one, and I mean no one, touches your belongings unless you request it. Now go upstairs and have dinner. I need 15 minutes to finish a call. What kind of call? The kind that changes the setting of your story. I paused by the elevator. You said I have one night. Yes, one night only to decide whether you want to be the unlucky witness or the chosen one. He tilted his head. The steel in his eyes softened instantly, revealing something almost human thin and fragile as the rim of a glass. And Natalie, if you choose the second I promise tonight, will fade into nothing more than a gray streak on a far bigger canvas. I wasn't sure if I heard the elevator chime or my heartbeat. All I knew was that I stepped inside without looking back. There are moments when life splits into 2 timelines, and you choose an entire universe, with one small motion stepping into that box of light. The doors closed. In the blurred reflection, I saw a drenched American girl with wide-open eyes, as if seeing herself for the first time. From far down the hall, his voice followed tomorrow morning. Tomorrow, 2 words light as a key, but I knew once it turned the lock, it would open more than just a door. If you're curious about Charles's offer and which path Natalie will take, please tell me what you want to see in part 2. A masterful legal twist, a buried truth from Charles's past, or a romantic turn that flips the entire story. Comment on your choice, and I'll continue the story in the direction you most want to see. I don't remember precisely when I drifted off. I only know that when I opened my eyes, the first light slipping through the curtains didn't belong to apartment 3B on Maple Street, but to a high-floor room where the Charles River caught the pale, icy dawn so clear it made you feel a little too real. On the dark wooden table sat a tray of coffee still steaming beside it, a thick envelope heavy enough to suggest importance. A small slip of paper rested on top conference room 28th floor. 8:30 a.m. CH. I checked the clock. 8:17. When I exited the elevator, I found him standing with his back to the glass wall. The city lay under him like a vast map, buildings lost in mist streams of cars moving like capillaries. He didn't turn, but I knew he knew I'd arrived. "Is the coffee to your liking?" His voice was low and even, like everything here stronger than I expected. Only then did he turn around. Same dark suit, same face that didn't need a flattering angle to command attention. But his eyes were brighter than last night, not from sleep, but from a decision made. "You ask very few questions when you're afraid," he said. "Good. I don't need weakness in this plan. I haven't agreed to any plan." He nodded lightly and gestured to the envelope. I opened it and found 3 documents: a temporary marriage contract, a media rollout draft, and an absolute non-disclosure agreement. I need someone to stand beside me in the most legitimate form possible, a wife. A dry laugh escaped me. "Do you hear yourself? We've known each other for less than 10 hours. You killed a man in front of me, and now you want me to marry you." "More precisely," he said gently, "I want to protect you in the only way the law respects." I was about to argue, but he continued slowly, like working through a difficult proof. "You're the only surviving witness to what happened last night. And that wasn't an ordinary homicide. It's part of a war between my conglomerate and the Kozlov Group. They hired people to tail us, crack cameras, and pull data. When their man was discovered, he opened fire. I shot first. I don't believe you. You don't have to. But I believe in their capability. They'll find and erase you to eliminate evidence. I've wiped the trails, but you're still a real person. If you marry me, you become a legal member of the Hernandez family protected by spousal privilege. No one, not even the feds, can force you to testify against me." He said it as calmly as if proposing an investment deal. I folded the paper as if I were holding a stiletto wrapped in velvet. "You think marriage is something you can sign in 15 minutes? No, but we don't have 15 days. Silence. Somewhere in my memory, last night's rain mingled with the sigh of the air conditioner. "Do you have any family?" he asked. I faltered. No one left. My mother died when I was 18. My father followed a few years later in a car accident. Friends. A handful of colleagues. They'd assume I changed schools if I disappeared for a few weeks. He nodded as if that detail had just confirmed the feasibility of a transaction, all the more reason you need this protection. "And you?" I asked. "What do you need from me besides a legal pretext?" His gaze softened for a fraction, then cooled. "I need a calm face in my world. The press is asking too many questions. Investors need to believe I have something that makes me want to survive." I shot back. "Fake love?" "No," he said, "a fundamental reason to exist." The air seemed to dip. I realized I was looking at him longer than necessary. The way he stood before the glass solitary but not alone made me see something I'd long wanted: a deliberate silence. "You aren't the only one gambling, Natalie," he went on. "You're betting your freedom. I'm betting my trust." Trust in whom? In you. Someone who didn't shake at the sight of blood. Someone who looked straight at me. I drew a breath. The scent of cooled coffee and oak merged into something undeniably real, the smell of a morning I could no longer turn away from. "Suppose I agree," I said. "How do you intend to pull it off, church wedding?" splashy headlines. He let out a small laugh. We don't need a blessing, only a notary. Everything will happen quietly within 24 hours. After that, the media will see what I want them to see, a small private ceremony. 2 people who've been quietly involved through a community arts education project. You'll take leave from teaching and assume the role of director of the Hera Foundation. I've had people assemble employment records, photos, and social posts. He said it so matter-of-factly that I felt my life had been reprogrammed since last night. How many people have you done this for assistance partners, attorneys, shareholders? But never a woman. I gave a wry smile. What an honor. He looked at me so long that the air seemed to lose weight. You don't understand, Natalie. I've never needed someone beside me without a calculated purpose. And now my calculations are not sound. A small silence. He extended his hand palm open without pressure. You have until tonight to answer. But I can't guarantee what will happen there if you leave here before sunset. I didn't take his hand. But I didn't leave either. In the afternoon, I sat in the small library downstairs. Oil paintings covered the walls, their amber-lit surfaces almost breathing. At the center hung the portrait of a young woman, black hair loose, eyes as indeterminate as mine. A small plate beneath the frame read, Isabella Hernandez, 1970-2003. That's my mother. His voice came from behind me. I turned. He wasn't in a suit now, but in a white shirt with the sleeves rolled high, no tie. He looked like someone else entirely. She's beautiful. She was a painter like you. I smiled faintly. I only teach. I'm not an artist. No one is born an artist. You become one when you learn to see what others overlook. Sunlight slanted through the window, revealing a thin thread-like scar along his wrist. She died of heart disease, he said quietly. My father died 2 years later in a plant explosion. I grew up among people who believed power is the only way not to be hurt. I thought it too. Until last night. Last night he looked at me so directly that I had to swallow. When you didn't scream or beg and stood there and looked at me, I knew you weren't like anyone in my world. You reminded me that some things haven't been priced yet. A draft slipped through the door. The smell of old rain and resinous wood made the air cool and damp. I said nothing. He stepped closer and stopped far enough that the space between us was still a choice. I'm not promising love. I'm promising the truth. And the truth is, if you walk out, they'll find you before nightfall. If you stay, I'll use everything I have to keep you safe. He paused, then said softly, Sometimes the only safety is beside the most dangerous man. I took a long breath, my heartbeat steady, as if refusal wouldn't change a thing. I remembered the slick parking lot gunshots breaking the air, the man wiping his hands in the rain. And now that man stood before me, hand extended with the same gaze but a different meaning. We don't have to call it a marriage, he said quietly. Call it a survival pact. I looked at his hand, then back at the portrait. The woman's eyes seemed to follow me. I don't know what made me lift my hand, but when our fingers touched, I knew the decision had been sealed when I dropped my keys on the school floor last night. The door sighed shut behind us, and I heard his voice lower at my ear. Welcome to my world. Natalie. Outside Boston had just turned off the sun. Inside a game had begun where every move has a price. Perhaps I had just wagered my heart. Boston wore a thin veil of fog that morning, as if the city wanted to hide what was about to happen. I sat before the mirror staring at the woman in the ivory dress and still unable to believe she was me. Light spilled from the tall window, so delicate it felt like a deep breath could dissolve everything into air. The dress Charles chose fit to the last seam. The neckline dipped just enough to reveal my collarbones. Lace skimmed my shoulders in a soft embrace. It wasn't ostentatious, but a refinement made me feel unfamiliar, as if I were putting on another identity. Are you all right, Miss Moore? Elena Morales asked softly, smoothing a fold at my back. I don't know, I answered truthfully, eyes fixed on my reflection. I feel like I'm in a rehearsal. No one has given me the script. Elena's smile flickered faint but threaded with a strange understanding. Everyone plays a part in this house, including Natalie. The only difference is that some roles are written and some are chosen. Her words left me quiet. I had never imagined getting married, And certainly not to a man like Charles Hernandez, someone whose mere entrance could make a room switch itself off. The ceremony was held at Longwood Estate west of Boston, a restored manor with the white stone walls, steep roofs, and glass-framed doors like a Nordic castle. No fireworks, no orchestra. Just 20 guests' faces whose gazes alone could make others lower theirs. I descended the staircase. Each step felt like a measured breath. My heels on the wood echoed in near absolute silence, and Charles was at the end of the corridor, his pale gray eyes reflecting the chandelier's light. He wore a black suit, a matching tie, no boutonniere, only a white pocket square folded with exacting precision. When I reached him, he bowed slightly and held out his hand. "Don't be afraid." "I'm not," I said, my voice rougher than I understood. "No," he murmured almost on a breath. I was talking to myself. His hand was warm, steady, weighted with the assurance of someone used to controlling outcomes. But when his thumb gave the smallest press to mine, I saw it a hairline fracture behind those cold eyes, as if beneath that spotless pane of glass there was a heart cracking by degrees, one he refused to let anyone see. The elderly officiant read brief declarations. Each word passed like a line in a contract. "Do you, Charles Hernandez, take I do? And do you, Natalie Moore?" I parted my lips, my voice catching in my throat. "I do." It wasn't the yes of love. It was the nod of someone stepping into a game without time to learn the rules. When Charles bent and brushed his mouth to mine, everything in the room went still. No applause, no music. Only a moment so silent it stole the air. He didn't press. He only skimmed a paradox of sensation, the kiss of a man who doesn't believe in marriage, honest enough to keep me from closing my eyes. The small reception took place in the back garden. The sky was a shade of blue that didn't look real, and I felt like I was still in a dream, one too perfectly arranged to be true. No champagne. A tall, broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair approached. His voice carried a distinct New York cadence. "I'm not used to it," I said with a polite smile, holding my distance. "Be careful. Turn down too many invitations in this world and people will decide you're proud. I'll have to learn fast." He gave a brief chuckle. "I'm Edward Monroe Charles's financial advisor. I used to think he'd never marry. And now..." He paused, eyes sharp, as he glanced toward Charles, who was speaking with a group of guests near the reflecting pool. "He changed after he met you. I don't know whether that's good or bad, but I hope you're strong enough to stay in his orbit without being crushed." A chill ran along my spine. "I'm no celestial body," I said quietly. "I'm just trying not to melt." Monroe smiled and lifted his glass. "If you can genuinely manage that, you'll be the first." That night, we returned to the penthouse in Manhattan, a high-floor apartment whose balcony surveyed the entire city. When the door clicked shut, I realized that for the first time since I'd met him, there was no one else between us. He loosened his tie and shrugged off his jacket unhurried. I stood in the expansive living room, feeling the silence wrap around me like heavy silk. "Do you regret it?" he asked, still turned away. "I haven't had time to." He faced me and crossed the space until his breath skimmed my hair. "Natalie, I don't expect you to love me. But if you're going to stay, you need to understand this in my world. There's no room for half measures. Here, everything has a price, even feelings." I know I said, though I wasn't sure I did. He was quiet for a beat, then spoke more softly. "You're not an object. You're the one collateral I don't want to lose." My heart stumbled not from romance, but from the admission itself in Charles Hernandez's world. Even tenderness was a form of transaction, and he no longer knew how to price it. He handed me a velvet box. Inside lay pearl earrings ringed with tiny diamonds, their light soft as water. "They were my mother's," he said, voice low. "She wore them on her wedding day. I want you to have them." Cool and weighty in my palm, they felt like an inheritance that wasn't mine. "Thank you. No need. Consider it a silent pledge." He turned to the window. Outside, the city blazed like an electronic map. In the glass, I watched his silhouette. The street glow traced his shoulders as if he carried his own halo of light that belongs to those who are so alone they must generate it to withstand the dark. Why me, I asked without meaning to. In a world this vast, why me? He was silent for a long time. Then just loud enough to hear not sufficient to unravel because you look at me as if I could still be forgiven. I didn't sleep. Wind scraped the high floors, making the panes quiver. I sat at the edge of the bed, peering into the dark, trying to unthread memories cut to exact frames, the classroom, the parking lot, the rain-lit lamps, his hand. Everything had happened too fast, so fast, I couldn't tell if I was living or inside a planned dream. But through it all, one thing stayed sharp, the look in his eyes when he said, "I need you to survive." No one had ever said that to me. No one had ever made me feel both afraid and compelled to understand. And as the city lights shimmered back from the glass, I realized this even if the marriage began as a contract. Something was quietly escaping the lines, as if between the cold plates of metal and law, there was something neither of us had intended a real feeling. In the morning haze, I woke to a dim, silvery light. Charles hadn't left. He sat at his desk in a white shirt, coffee in hand. Early sun slanted through the windows, carving his features into something unreal. He said, "Good morning," Mrs. Hernandez, voice deep and still, like water beneath ice. I stood in the doorway looking at him and answered softly, "Good morning, Mr. Hernandez." For the first time, I heard his surname attached to me. It sounded distant and frightening, yet somehow it carried something else, the feeling of being seen. Perhaps amid the lies and terms, I had started to believe unquestioningly that Charles Hernandez had a heart behind that pane of perfect ice. And if I were patient enough, maybe I would be the first to make it tremble. Hawaii greeted us with gentle gold sunlight and the taste of salt carried on the wind. From the private jet's cabin, I looked down at Kauai, a deep green island stretching into the ocean like a secret wrapped in mist. It wasn't a honeymoon, at least not in the usual sense. Everything was arranged with such immaculate efficiency that it felt almost emotionless. A private villa, a security team, a house manager, and a packed schedule. But at the center of all those numbers, there was one thing unplanned, the space between me and Charles. He was still the man I'd met on that rainy Boston night, precise, restrained speaking, little doing much. Yet here among sun and sea, that cold control seemed to carry a weariness. Maybe even steel needs rest. It simply doesn't know how. I woke early on the first morning at Hale Makoa Villa and threw the windows open. The sound of the waves rose and fell like the island's heartbeat. In the distance, Charles cut through the pool, each stroke strong and clean, his body slicing the water as if outrunning something invisible. I brewed 2 cups of coffee. When he climbed the steps, shirt clinging wet to his back, the light struck the droplets on his skin until they looked like metal. I set a cup down and said quietly, "Do you always start the day by fighting yourself?" He glanced over the corner of his mouth, lifting. "I'm not fighting. I need to remember I'm alive." "Are you afraid of dying?" "I'm afraid of having nothing left to live for." The words hung there, then thinned into air. I didn't answer. I just set a towel within his reach. He took it without another word. But I knew something had shifted between us. Silences were starting to do the speaking. On the 3rd day, Ethan Cole, head of security, found me in the gym. He was tall, solid, with eyes sharp enough to read a person's thoughts. The boss wants you to learn some basic self-defense. Self-defense, I was surprised. I thought this place was guarded to the teeth. Exactly why you need it. When people believe they're safest, they're easiest to hurt. I didn't object. Ethan taught me how to grip a pistola and feel its real weight. When my finger trembled, he only said, "Don't be afraid. Weapons don't kill people. Fear does." The first session left me spent, but when I tucked the small handgun into the pocket of my jacket, I realized my hands no longer shook. Maybe I was learning how to exist in Charles's world, a world where trust isn't given. It's forged in steel. That evening, Charles appeared in the dining room without warning. He'd left his jacket behind, just a white shirt and dark trousers. "I hear you trained with Ethan. Details like that wouldn't interest you." "On the contrary," he said, pouring wine. "I'm interested in anything that could make you disappear." I let out a low laugh. "You talk about everything as if you're negotiating a contract." His gaze eased instantly, maybe because I've never learned to speak in feelings. "And now?" He set the glass down and stepped closer, voice dropping. "Now I'm trying to learn, but I need you to be patient with me." I didn't know what to say. The honesty in his eyes knocked me off balance. With this man, everything was calculated except in that moment, I felt he was showing me the most fragile part of himself, the part he probably wished to hide. We found a strange rhythm in the following days. Mornings of video calls for him, afternoons of shoreline walks for me. Sometimes he joined, saying nothing, simply matching my pace. I collected shells. He stared toward the horizon, looking like someone who had lost the whole world, but was still trying to remember the way back. Fresh from the shower one evening, I stepped onto the balcony and found Charles already there. In his hands was a thick, worn leather notebook, its spine frayed. "Do you write?" I asked. "No," he said, still looking at the sea. I read. A memoir. He shook his head and handed it to me. I opened it, his mother's journal. Isabella Hernandez. Yellowed pages, a soft hand. One line read, "Charles is 12 today." He doesn't say much, but he has his father's eyes, the kind that look at everything as if it can be controlled. I only hope he learns to love what cannot be. My chest dipped. When I looked up, he was watching me. I asked, "Have you ever tried loving something you can't control?" "Yes," he said, his gaze settling on me. "And that's why it scares me." One morning, the wind kicked up. The sea-darkened clouds pressed low, and waves rose higher than usual. I was on the balcony when a small pop sounded somewhere, a direction I couldn't place. Then Ethan's voice crackled over the radio alpha team, "Close the south gate." Unidentified object approaching the bay. Before I could react, Charles pulled me inside. His eyes had gone cold and sharp, nothing like the man I'd come to know in the last few days. "Safe room. Now." "I'm fine." No arguments. His tone snapped shut. He keyed in a code. A panel behind the wood cabinet swung open like a hidden door, and he ushered me into the small room beyond. Dim light. Footsteps. The clink of weapons. Everything lasted only minutes, but it stretched like an hour. Then silence. Too much silence. When I opened the door, the tang of gunpowder clung to the sea air. On the terrace, Charles stood with a torn sleeve and a scraped arm. Ethan was sweeping glass from the floor. I ran to him. "You're hurt." "Not severely," he said, composed. But when I looked closer, blood had seeped through his white shirt. I guided him to a chair and reached for the first aid kit. He let me bandage him without a word. Strangely, my hands trembled while my heart stayed steady. As I pressed the final dressing in place, he asked, "You're not afraid I'm angry?" "Angry? Angry that you still think you can protect everyone alone." He looked at me, then smiled, a rare one, exhausted but real. "That's the first time anyone has said that to me." I touched the bandage lightly. "I'm not your weapon, Charles. I'm the one beside you." He fell quiet, then suddenly took my hand and drew me close. The distance vanished. Salt air cordite, a faint iron of blood, everything mingled. He brushed his lips to my forehead so gently it was almost only breath. "Don't ever leave my sight again." Night fell. The sea lay calm as if nothing had happened. I stood on the balcony, hair damp with salt. He sat inside reading reports silently. I understood then he doesn't know how to rest or how to believe the world can be peaceful even for a single night. I moved to the desk, took his mother's journal, and opened it to the final blank page. In my own hand, I wrote, "Today, someone saved me from fear, but I also want to save him from his own darkness." I closed the book and set it down. He looked at me, something soft passing through his eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I didn't write it for you to read." "I know, but I read it." A long beat. I didn't step away. And for the first time, he left his desk, came to me, and wrapped his arms around my shoulders. "You're right," he said softly, using you tenderly for the first time. "I've tried to protect this whole world and forgot that I needed someone to hold me in place." I looked up. Light caught in his eyes, and for a moment, Charles was no longer a man of contracts, power, and cold numbers. He was simply human, relearning how to trust. We stood like that for a long time in silence. Outside, the waves kept breaking warm, and even like two heartbeats finally finding each other. Here's a faithful, polished English translation that preserves your tone, rhythm, and imagery. That morning, the island wind shifted. It was no longer the gentle summer breeze, but carried a sharp salt bite and a dry hiss, like a blade sweeping across the cliffs. I woke because something felt wrong. The usually quiet villa throbbed with the distant steady chop of helicopters lower than usual. Charles was out on the veranda, white shirt snapping in the wind. He spoke into the radio with a calm so complete it was terrifying. Ethan Cole stood near the gate, one hand to his earpiece, eyes scanning the footpath down to the sea. I stepped out. "What's happening?" Charles looked at me, his gaze composed so deep it made you forget to breathe. Security picked up an irregular signal. It could be a reconnaissance drone or a false ping. Either way, we're leaving the property. Leaving right now. Right now! He said it without barking an order. It was urgency wrapped in the restraint of someone who's weathered too many crises. I wanted to ask more, but a small blast cracked from the cliffs. The glass panel of a nearby railing burst like a spray of fireworks. Ethan shouted, "Armed drone, move east." Charles shoved me inside. Everything happened so fast, fear didn't have time to bloom. I only heard my heart hammering in my chest. He pulled me along the corridor and opened the liquor cabinet behind. It was a hidden steel door leading down to the basement. Before I could speak, he keyed a code. "Down. And you, I'm coming after." "Ethan needs a coordinator outside." I gripped his wrist. "No, I'm not leaving you." It wasn't calculated or rational. It burst out like a reflex. His eyes paused, something fractured there, a hairline crack in the gray. "All right," he said softly as if conceding. "But you follow every word I say." Outside, the sea was furious. Their speedboat knifed toward shore, glossy black hull, flying a fake shipping company flag. Men in wetsuits with sidearms moved fast, coordinated. "Not ordinary pirates," Ethan said over comms. "They have the villa's exact coordinates." Charles answered crisply, "Hold the west position. I'm taking Natalie to the safe room by the wine cellar." We ran the stone hall, salt mist and spray, turning the air gauze. Each step struck the walls like a ticking clock. A round punched through the glass frame near the stairwell, grazing Charles's shoulder seam. I screamed, but he only tightened his brow and yanked me down. "I'm fine, just a scrape." He drew his sidearm fluid cold, precise enough to scare me, not of him, but of the world that had forced him to move like this. Ethan's status at the Gate 3 subdued. 2 heading east. I'm in pursuit. Keep the channel open. Charles dragged me into the cellar. The room was small, thick-walled, lined with old vintages and metal document safes. Warm amber light utterly at odds with the chaos outside. He handed me the compact pistol he'd taught me to use. "Please take it." I shook. "I can't." "You learned, now you use it." His hand settled on my shoulder, gaze steady. "Aim for the right shoulder if they find this room before I return. You don't have to kill anyone, just stay alive." I nodded. He turned to go. At the door, I called Charles. He stopped. "Are you sure you'll come back?" A flicker of a smile, rare, tender, and somehow painful. "I always come back, Natalie." Then he vanished through the door. The air thickened. I sat against the wall, listening to the wind howl, the surf smash rock, the faint pop of gunfire. It all braided into a brutal symphony. Time stretched like an overdrawn thread. Then a sound at the door. Soft but distinct. I sprang up, grip tightening on the gun. "Charles," Cow called. No answer. The lock turned. The door swung in. A stranger in black, masked, stepped through. His eyes were dark and cold. I backed up, heart beating my ribs. "You are Hernandez's wife?" he asked in a heavy Russian accent. I didn't answer. "He has done too much. He pays now. With you." He raised his gun, and before I could think, I squeezed the trigger. The report cracked the air. The round cut across the room and struck his right shoulder. He crumpled his weapon, clattering free. It took seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. I stood, frozen hands still trembling, the smell of powder, mingling with old wine, the scent of something that had both ended and begun. The door flew open again, Charles. Blood on his shirt eyes, bright as steel. He froze when he saw me, then crossed the room and gently pried the gun from my hand. "You did well." My throat closed. I fired." "Yes, and because of that, I get to see you again." He pulled me in his bloody hand firm at my shoulder. His breath was hot, ragged. I felt his heart pounding through his chest, so strong, so real it drowned the shots outside. "You're hurt," I whispered. "Not much." I looked at the tear in his sleeve, the slow welling of red. I wanted to speak, but he rested his forehead to mine, voice rough. "Don't ever scare me like that again." I answered as softly as breath. "Then don't leave me behind." Silence, then a small, pained, relieved laugh. "Deal." After the team subdued the attackers, the villa fell into a heavy hush. A medevac helicopter set down on the lawn. Ethan came in, face smudged with smoke. "They're Kozlov's mercenaries," he told Charles. "Orders were to take you alive, not kill you. Looks like they wanted something else." What I asked. Charles looked at me, half calculating, half remote. "Information. Or me." Ethan met his eyes. "You can't stay here. They'll be back." "I know." He nodded. "We fly to New York tonight." I didn't argue. There was no reason to remain. The beautiful island had become the scorched shell of a brief dream. On the flight back to Manhattan, I sat by the window. The sea below was a sheet of black glass. Charles beside me rewrapped his bandaged face unreadable. I watched him in profile, familiar and strange, like a dream I'd gone too far into to turn back. I touched his hand lightly. He stilled, then turned, surprise flickering in his eyes. "You told me not to be afraid," I said softly, "but I just watched you be frightened." "I'm not afraid of dying," he said, voice hoarse with fatigue. "I'm so scared of losing you." My fingers closed around his. There was nothing more to add. Outside, the sky was a clean blank page. We sat like that, silent, until New York rose on the horizon, a silver seam in the dark. That was when I realized this flight wasn't only taking us away from Kauai, it was carrying us across an invisible border between pretense and truth, between arrangement and feeling. Charles's hand tightened around mine. No words were necessary. In that moment, amid the drone of engines and the dark beyond the glass, I knew some declarations of love don't need saying, they resound all the same, like the first gunshot on a storm-torn night. The helicopter set down on the roof of Hera Tower at 4 a.m. The city hadn't woken yet, only distant lights floated in the glass, like 1,000 quiet eyes watching. I climbed out with Charles, my legs still shaky after a long flight on which we'd barely spoken. He walked ahead, stride sure, though the bandage on his shoulder had bled a pale red bloom. In the dark, his figure was a clean cut against the gray sky, substantial, cold, and so tired you wanted to touch him just to ensure he was flesh and bone. Elena Morales had prepared the penthouse. The smell of disinfectant mixed with the familiar oak, and I felt I'd come back to the beginning, only the world had changed. I was no longer the naive art teacher swept into a storm. I knew the smell of gunpowder and blood, and the price of a choice I'd thought was only about survival. Charles sank into a chair and unbuttoned his jacket. The light cast edges along his cheekbones, sharpening the hard lines. I came close and checked the wound. He flinched when the bandage tugged at his skin, but didn't pull away. He said quietly, "Don't look at me like that, still staring out at the windows. I'm fine." "You always say I'm fine, even when you're still bleeding." He turned. This time his gaze wasn't steel, more the look of someone so used to pain, he no longer feared it. "If I weaken myself, they'll tear apart everything I've built. And they'll tear you apart too. I don't need a hero. I need someone afraid of losing me." Silence. My words were a small blade, bloodless but burning. He sighed, voice dropping low. "I am afraid. But fear is never a luxury in this world." 3 days later, life in New York snapped back to a suspiciously normal rhythm. The press spoke only of a fire at a vacation villa in Kauai. No one mentioned the attack. Photos of me and Charles appeared on the cover of a finance magazine, 2 even smiles beneath the headline, "CEO of Hera Logistics and Tech Launches Community Fund, named for his wife." I stared at the paper, struck by the paradox the world was praising a beautiful story, while that night I'd fired a gun to keep breathing. But that was precisely how Charles wanted it. "The fewer who know, the better," he said when he saw me holding the magazine. Sometimes the truth doesn't need praise. It just needs to exist. I didn't argue. Instead, I poured myself into the Hera Foundation, which I now ran. Meetings with the planning team and sketches for community art centers in Queens, Newark, and the South Bronx filled my days. In the morning, I was in a bright room littered with drafts and traffic humming from Lexington Avenue below. In the afternoons, I walked vacant lots talking with street kids whose eyes looked like mine when I was small, curious, and afraid in equal measure. Those moments made me feel truly alive. And perhaps that was the only way I knew not to become a prop in Charles's story. On Friday afternoon, a light rain fell. Manhattan wore a thin, smoke-colored film. When I returned, Charles's office door was ajar. A piano drifted out low, a little uneven, like someone who'd never studied but remembered every note. I stood in the doorway and watched him at the keys. Sleeves rolled, hair a little mussed. Hands that knew pens and pistols now testing black and white with careful, almost clumsy intent. When the music paused, he spoke without turning. "How long have you been there since you missed your third note?" He smiled rare. "I'm not good at music. My mother tried to teach me, but I never learned long enough." I stepped in and set my hand on the keys. "You were playing Claire de Lune. Not exactly wrong, just too fast. I don't know how to slow down." I sat beside him brushing a neighboring key. "I'll teach you. But you have to promise not to count every beat." He tilted his head. "I can't promise that." "Then let me lead." I laid my hand over his and pressed a white key. A clear tone rose soft as the first breath after a storm. He didn't pull away. We kept playing half right, half wrong, and for the first time Charles Hernandez wasn't in control. When the music ended, he stared at the rain. I said nothing. Some silences between two people don't need to be filled. That night, we ate on the roof terrace. The sky was cloudy. The wind carried the city's metallic tang. Charles poured wine and set a glass before me. "Where are you going tomorrow, Queens? I want to meet the young architect's great ideas for the community gallery. I'll send someone with you." I smiled. "Ethan, I think he's busy tracking Kozlov." Charles's grip tightened slightly on his glass. "I don't like you going alone." "Charles, I'm no longer the girl who needs to hide in a wine cellar." He looked at me deep and quiet. "No, you're not. But the world out there hasn't changed." I understood. Beneath what sounded like protection was a fear he'd never admit he feared losing me. The Hera Foundation opened its first art center in the South Bronx a week later. Old walls bloomed with color. A stage lit up a street that used to be drowned in trash. Kids ran in circles, laughter braided with jazz spilling from the speakers. I stood at the podium and spoke briefly, my eyes unknowingly searching the crowd for Charles. He stood back, not in the front row, arms crossed, watching. When I finished, he gave a slight nod, the kind I knew meant, "You did well." After the event, I found him in a small gallery behind the stage. He was studying a painting by a 10-year-old girl, two hands reaching for each other in the middle of a fire. "You see yourself in that?" I asked. "No," he said slowly. "I see you." I laughed. "Someone holding a brush in a blaze, no. Someone who doesn't run from it." He stepped closer and touched my cheek. "You know, Natalie, I once thought love was a weakness. It could be the reason people stand in the fire." I didn't answer. I only looked at him in the last light of day, where the sun slid through the window and landed across his face. In that instant, I knew no matter how many layers of ice he wore, something inside him was melting. That night back at the penthouse, Charles sat by the window. Shirt unbuttoned, a glass of wine in his hand. He didn't say much, just watched the city. I came and sat beside him. "What are you thinking tomorrow?" "That's all?" He shook his head. "No, I'm thinking, if you would still be here if all of this disappeared?" Company power money one day? I looked at him a long time before I answered slowly. "If one day you lost everything, I'd be the first to pull you up. But if you lose yourself, no one can save you." He went still. Then Charles set his glass down for the first time, leaned in and touched his mouth to mine. The kiss wasn't hurried or possessive. It was gentle, like an apology from someone who has only ever known how to command. In that moment, I understood what we had didn't explode like a bullet or blaze like a fire. It soaked in like rain after a storm, quiet, steady, stubbornly enduring. Outside, New York roared on. Inside that room, I could hear his heartbeat clearly no longer armored. No longer racing, real and fragile like an autumn that hasn't yet arrived. October and New York was turning. The sky no longer burned like Kauai's summer. It held a softer light, as if the city breathed more slowly. Maple leaves littered the sidewalks along Madison Avenue, and in our penthouse, I felt as though everything was waiting for one strong wind to shatter it. Lately, Charles had been speaking less. He still went to Heritech headquarters every morning, and still wore that chill that kept people wary. But when he came home, something in his eyes was different, as if he were looking through me toward a place I could never reach. I asked Elena, his loyal house manager of 10 years. "Elena, has he been different?" She shook her head, though her voice hesitated. "Mr. Hernandez is as he always is. Except a few times I've seen him leave in the middle of the night without security. When I asked, he said he just needed a little air. Air where? At Pier 19, by the Hudson." Pier 19. The name pricked at my memory. The spot he'd said was his father's delivery point before the assassination. The place he'd promised never to return. That night, I waited for him. 10 o'clock, then 11, then almost midnight. His phone didn't ring. No messages arrived. I sat by the window watching the city shine like a mirror. Headlights flowed along the avenue, cold, hurried streaks of light. At 1 in the morning, the door opened. He came in with mist on his coat hair, mussed eyes dim with fatigue. "You're still up." I waited. "You shouldn't have. You're safe here. You don't have to stay awake for me." I stepped closer, keeping my voice gentle. "You don't need me awake, but you don't need to vanish either." "Charles, what's going on?" He looked at me for a long time, then shook his head lightly. "Not now." "When then?" "When everything collapses." He faltered. For a split second, I saw it fear, raw and real before he hid it away. "Listen to me," he said softly. "Some things only put you in danger if you know them." I stepped back, my voice catching. "You always say that. But you don't understand, it's your silence that kills me." He didn't answer. He only came close and set his hand to my cheek. Fingers as cold as metal. "Trust me, Natalie. Sometimes love means not asking." I didn't know whether to believe that. But that night when he slept, I lay beside him with my eyes open in the dark. And I knew there would come a day I would have to ask, even if the answer cost me everything. The next morning, Ethan came to the Hera Foundation office. He looked at me as if he wanted to speak and weighed his words. He began by saying, "I shouldn't step into your private life, but there are things you need to know." Last night he met someone at Pier 19. Not a partner. Kozlov's people. I froze. "You're sure, but they didn't seem there to threaten him, more to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" "Don't know. I caught a few words on the comms Titan code and primary access. I suspect someone's forcing him to hand something over in exchange for silence. Silence about what Ethan exhaled. Maybe the 2016 incident. His father's death wasn't just an accident, Natalie. That night I didn't wait at home. I went to Pier 19. River wind cut like glass. Rusting containers and old sodium lamps are bleeding yellow from the warehouses. I hid behind a brick wall and heard a car pull in a black Bentley. The door opened, and I knew the shape that stepped out. Charles. In a long coat, walking fast to a man already waiting. Silver hair, gray suit, Viktor Kozlov, the Russian magnate, who had once tried to force Charles to sign over the European shipping lanes. I held my breath and listened to phrases snatched by the wind. "The Titan code will be erased in 72 hours. "I don't care, Victor. You should. If it leaks, you don't just lose Hera. Your woman won't have anywhere to hide. Touch her and I'll turn you into a memory." Brave words, Charles. But don't forget who helped bury your father's past. Pay that debt now by keeping quiet. I heard a gun being racked. My heart stopped, but Charles only said flat and cold. "You're teaching me silence, Victor. I learned it at 13 watching my father die and not being allowed to cry." A soft laugh from the other man. "Then use that lesson before your woman learns to cry in your stead." A beat of silence. Then an engine turned over. The Bentley pulled away. I hadn't retreated when a shadow seized my arm from behind. "Are you insane?" Ethan's voice. He'd followed me. If Charles sees you here, he'll lose control. He already has, Ethan. I said, breath tight. He's trading something, and I need to know what. When I came home, Charles was studying with a glass before him and eyes on the city. Where were you? His voice was low, not loud, but chilling. Pier 19. He set the glass down and turned. In that dim light, his pupils flashed like metal. You followed me. I went looking for the husband who disappears at midnight. You don't understand, Natalie. Then make me understand. He stood and came closer. Some secrets can't be opened without paying in blood. I've seen blood. I said, my voice shaking but steady at the core. In Kauai, on your hands. Do you still think I'm afraid? Charles stopped. A long time passed before he spoke quietly. My father didn't die for money. He died for Titan. What is Titan? The core code for Hera's global logistics platform is the system my father built. In the wrong hands, it could collapse an entire financial network. Kozlov wants it. I've kept it for 9 years, like keeping a curse. I went still. The pieces slid into place his sleepless nights. The murky calls, the emptiness in his eyes when he came home late. And me? I asked softly. What am I in all this? He looked straight at me unguarded for the first time, the one thing I refused to use as a weapon. We said nothing more that night. He slept on the sofa. I lay in the bedroom staring at the ceiling, listening to rain drum the glass. I thought about what I'd seen and understood this. Our love wasn't built only on feeling, but on what hadn't been said. And every secret, no matter how artfully hidden, was a hairline crack in the mirror. One day, the light would find its way through. I didn't know when it did what would break the mirror, or us. At dawn, Charles left early. He left a small note on the table, a single line. Don't look for me if I don't return within 48 hours. Believe that I'm doing it to protect you. The paper trembled in my hand, blurred by tears that hadn't yet fallen. And for the first time since I met him, I was terrified not of losing him, but that the man I love was turning himself into someone beyond saving. 2 days passed, then 3. Charles still hadn't come back. The penthouse turned cold in a strange way. Everything sat where it had always been. The gray coat he'd left on the stand, the wine glass with the faint print of his mouth, the silver watch lying face up on the table, its hands ticking on while the man who wore it seemed to have dissolved into air. Elena tried to stay composed, but I saw her hands tremble each time she picked up the phone. Ethan called, his voice ragged. We're looking. The last ping from his car was near Hudson Yards. After that, the signal went dark. He may have shut off the tracker. Why? Because he doesn't want to be found. I hung up with my heart contracting. Something inside me was splintering, not fear of losing him, but feeling left in the middle of an unfinished story. A brown envelope arrived at the Hera Foundation 3 days later, addressed under the alias MRR. Elena set it in front of me. Should we open it? I didn't answer. I tore the seal. Inside was a Florence postcard, the Duomo at sunset, and a folded sheet of paper. The slanted black ink was achingly familiar. Natalie. If you're reading this, it means I've done what I promised never to do, leave without saying goodbye. Words can't explain some things. They are only protected by silence. Titan has been partially stolen. I need to get it out of the US before it falls to Kozlov. Florence is the only place left that's safe. I don't dare promise I'll return. But if one day you hear Claire de Lune in the middle of Piazza della Signoria, stop. I might be close alive, remembering still loving. CH. I read the last line over and over, each stroke of the pen pressed into my skin. He wrote still loving 3 plain words, but in a man like Charles's hand, they felt like a vow more dangerous than any bullet. I couldn't stay still. A week later, I flew to Italy. Ethan objected fiercely. You're walking into the storm, Natalie. Florence is Kozlov's turf. He'll use you to drag Charles back if he knows you're there. I can't sit here and wait, I rasped, hoarse from sleepless nights. I have to find him. Ethan was quiet for a moment, then sighed. At least let me come. Florence greeted me with coffee and exhaustion. Autumn here wasn't like New York. Softer, sadder, like an old painting. I rented a small apartment near Piazza della Repubblica, where crowds flowed each morning. For 3 days, I combed the squares, the stations, the cafes. I carried his postcard staring at it repeatedly, as if a hidden key might appear. On the 4th day, standing by Ponte Vecchio, I heard a piano drifting from the end of the bridge. A melody I knew by heart, Claire de Lune. I spun around. A crowd had gathered around a street pianist in a dark coat with a straw hat pulled low. His hands moved over a battered keyboard. The sunset lit his wrist where a thin scar ran the same one I had touched when I dressed Charles's wound in Kauai. My heart stopped. I pushed through the crowd. Just then, he lifted his head, half his face lost in shadow. Those gray eyes. I couldn't be wrong. Charles. I called, but my voice vanished in the traffic and the tide of people. He looked at me for a heartbeat, then rose, abandoned the keyboard, and slipped into the crowd like a shadow melting into dusk. I ran after him. He was gone among the winding streets. That night, I went to the Hotel Arno, where he'd stayed on a business trip years ago. The receptionist shook his head when I showed a photo. No Senora, no one by Hernandez. But last week, an American passport checked in as Carl Henning. It could be a coincidence. Henning, the clipped echo of Hernandez. I knew. The clerk said he'd left that morning, leaving luggage in storage. I asked to open it. In the black case lay a single item, an encrypted hard drive, and an old photo of Charles with his father in front of Titan Logistics when he was a teenager. Beneath the photo, a handwritten line. It all began here, and it will end here. He wanted me to understand. Titan wasn't just data, it was a memory he was trying to bury. I met Ethan at midnight in Piazza della Signoria. He'd just arrived tracking a faint ping from one of Charles's old devices. Tip says he was seen at Santa Croce. No guarantee he's still there. We cut through narrow lanes, cold stone walls, and shop fronts sealed for the night. Near the church, I saw a figure standing beneath Dante's statue, tall with a long coat and a hood lifted by the wind. Charles. I ran my heart-breaking rhythm. He turned. The eyes were the same, superb, deeper now, carrying days of hiding. You shouldn't be here, he said low. Neither should you. He watched me in silence, then let out a tired smile. I've tried to keep you out, but you're the only one who doesn't listen. Because you forgot. I said, tears stinging, I promised not to leave you no matter where you disappear. He gripped my shoulders. Kozlov's in Florence. He knows I have the rest of Titan. If he finds you, it's over. Then let it end with me. He shook his head, a faint light touching his eyes. I've seen too many die because of me. I won't let you be next. Charles, you don't understand. I didn't come here to die. I came to remind you you're alive. He stilled. Something softened in his gaze. I thought I'd learned how not to need anyone, he said quietly. But seeing you here in this city, I realized this whole time you kept me running. I took his hand, cold and trembling. Then stop running. He opened his mouth to answer. Gunfire cracked. A round sparked off the stone. Ethan shouted, "Move!" Charles yanked me down, his body shielding mine. 3 men in black closed in one with a suppressed weapon. Kozlov's crew. Ethan yelled, drawing and firing. Shots slammed through the Florence night. Charles pulled me to my feet and dragged me into a narrow alley behind the church. Bullets hissed past. His breath was harsh. His grip on my hand never loosened. I won't let them touch you, he said, shooting as we staggered back. At the alley's end, a round grazed his shoulder. Blood spread through his coat. I panicked, but he stayed steady, voice tight. Just a scratch. No, Charles, you're bleeding out. He slumped back to the wall, breath heavy. Yellow light washed his face, ferocious and oddly peaceful. You have to go. No. Natalie, I told you if you die, I die here. He laughed softly and set his palm to my cheek. Don't say that. Someone like you shouldn't end in the dark. And you should silence. Then slowly I was born in it. But maybe just once I'd like to see the light. I held him as wind threaded the alley, church bells ringing somewhere far away. Sirens swelled. The men withdrew. Ethan ran up, calling for an ambulance. Charles's lips moved, barely sounding. Don't let them take Titan. It isn't theirs. It's ours. I gripped his hand, tears falling onto his wrist, cold and salty as the Arno. 3 days later, he woke in a hospital outside Florence. The wound wasn't fatal, but he'd lost a lot of blood. When his eyes opened, I was beside him with an Italian paper spread across my lap, the headline shouting, "Kozlov arrested in Milan. Titan project secured." He looked at me and smiled faintly. "You didn't listen again." I leaned in and laid my hand over his chest, where the heartbeat thudded still weak, because I believe that sometimes love is a way to survive. He let his eyes close, his breathing eased. Morning light spilled through the window across the sheets, and at that moment, I knew Florence would always be where our love was saved, not by miracle, but by the faith that two damaged people could still find each other in the dark. After the storm, Florence smelled of thyme and of counterfeit peace. The cobbled streets seemed cleaner, the trees more yellowed, and the crowds crossing Piazza della Signoria were just as thick. Yet no one realized that place had once held blood gunfire and a man collapsing in the arms of the woman he loved. 3 weeks later, Charles was discharged. He was thinner and paler, but his eyes still held that familiar steel. Only now a new softness was folded inside it. "I want to go back to New York," he said quietly as I helped him into his coat. "The doctor said you should rest for 2 more weeks." "I can't." He lifted his gaze to mine, voice frighteningly calm. "Titan still isn't entirely erased. As long as it exists, there will be people who want me dead." I studied him for a long moment. I understood then, some people don't know how to live peacefully. They only know how to live to protect what they believe in, even at the cost of themselves. I sighed. "Then I'm coming with you." He started to object, but I cut in. "Don't forget, without me, you'd have died in Florence." Something like a weary smile flickered in his eyes. "So you're demanding a reward?" "No," I said low. "I'm claiming my right to stay." We flew back to New York on a night flight. As the plane touched down at JFK, the first snow had begun. The city glowed beneath a white haze, as if every wound had been temporarily swaddled in winter's hush. Ethan met us at the airport, face grim the company's tense. "The board is demanding access to Titan. Rumor is that Charles lost the master code. Charles said they'd have their answer in the morning." He didn't sleep that night. The entire penthouse was lit. I sat on the sofa and watched him stand before a massive screen, streaming lines of code, the numbers cascading, glinting like the city lights beyond the glass. "What is Titan really?" I asked. He paused, turned. "The soul of Hera Logistics, a map of millions of routes, contracts, and international shipping data. And the reason is that dozens of people are dead, including your father." He nodded. "He built it to change the world, but the world used it to split power. I kept it so as not to get rich, but to keep men like Kozlov from turning it into a weapon." I looked at him, love and pain braided tight. "So what will you do with it now?" "Erase it," he said simply, "for good." I fell silent. Part of me understood for Charles erasing Titan was also erasing his past. The next morning, the 70th floor boardroom at Hera Tech was packed major shareholders' attorneys' media. The lights carved hard planes across Charles Hernandez's face, no longer a man in a hospital bed, but the CEO who had made corporations bow. An elderly shareholder spoke first. "We want to know, Mr. Hernandez, does Titan still exist? Rumor has it, you lost it to Kozlov." Charles set both hands on the table, eyes like ice. Titan was never lost. It was stored in the safest place with the only person I trust. Silence fell, every gaze fixed on him. Someone asked, "And who is that?" He looked straight at me sitting at the far end of the table, among folders and white light. "My wife." A murmur rippled through the room. I froze. Before I could react, he went on level and clear. Titan is no longer a tool. It has been split, re-encrypted, and embedded in an independent security system under the Hera Foundation, the nonprofit she runs. This means no one can exploit it for commercial ends, including me. A lawyer shot to his feet. "You transferred corporate assets into a private foundation. That's a violation." Charles cut him off. "No, I transferred it because it's the only way for Titan to survive without becoming a monster." The room stilled. For a few seconds, I saw that the metal glare in his eyes was gone, replaced by the light of someone who had chosen to step back to protect what mattered most. When the meeting ended, I met him in the quiet hallway. You just put the entire company at risk. No, he said, gaze straight ahead. I just saved it from human ambition. And the board won't forgive you. He stopped and turned slightly. I've never needed their forgiveness. His voice was even, but beneath it, I heard something else, a weariness that had reached its limit. 3 days later, the headlines exploded. Charles Hernandez resigns as CEO of Hera Tech. Titan's successor named Hera Foundation. Billionaire Hernandez's wife. From outsider to the center of power. The morning paper's red-hot banners made me feel sadder than proud. I didn't want power. I only wanted him to be at peace. That afternoon, I found him at the old house by the Hudson, the place he'd once called the only spot where I don't have to act. He stood on the porch, wind lifting his hair eyes on the slow, flat water. Where will you go? I asked. Florence. For a while. Running again. A faint smile. No, learning how to live without fighting. I stepped closer, voice unsteady. And me. You'll stay. The Hera Foundation needs you, and I need you safe. I set my hand on his chest where the old wound hadn't fully closed. If you go, I won't chase you anymore. But don't forget, I'll still be waiting. He bowed his head until his forehead touched mine. I never forget. The wind carried the chill of the river. Time seemed to stall, as if the world were holding its breath to hear two people say in silence what couldn't be said out loud. A week later, he left New York. No send-off, no promise. Just an email arriving at dawn. When the world is quiet enough, I'll come back. If it isn't, let the music speak for me. CH. I read it again and again until morning. Only the wind threaded the windows in the empty apartment, cold and clear like winter drawing near. Months later, the Hera Foundation hosted its first charity exhibition since everything happened. I stood on stage, gave a brief address, then slipped into the main gallery. At the center hung the newest piece sent anonymously from Florence, a field of snow, a lone piano at its heart, and a small line in Italian at the bottom, La neve non può spegnere la musica del cuore. Snow cannot extinguish the heart's music. I stood there a long time. Someone asked, "Who's the artist?" I smiled. Someone who once promised to let music speak for him. And as a piano rose from the corner, Claire de Lune achingly familiar. I realized that wherever he was, Charles Hernandez was living in every note, in every breath of this winter. I didn't need to see to know amid the bitter white someone kept his heart warm, because love had taught him that sometimes to love, we must know how to disappear. 3 months after the trip to Florence, Boston welcomed summer with crystal clear mornings. The Charles River shimmered like glass, reflecting the pale blue sky, and the kayaks drifting lazily across its surface. Each morning, I still walked Ava, the young foster girl supported by the Hera Foundation across the Longfellow Bridge, stopped by the cafe on Beacon Street for a light foam cappuccino and looked east toward where the sunrise once began. The world seemed to have gone back to normal. But inside me, there was an emptiness, not large enough to call pain, yet not small enough to forget. On my foundation desk, I kept the postcard Charles had sent from Florence. The slanted black ink had faded slightly. Beneath it, he had written, "If you see a man standing by the sea with a camera one day, don't rush to leave. He might capture one last moment of peace before coming home to you." I had read those lines hundreds of times. Each word pulsed like a heartbeat, steady, gentle, never fading. Summer in Boston was like a rewritten season of transition. The Hera Foundation was growing faster than I'd ever imagined. New art centers for orphans had opened in Newark, Queens, and soon in San Francisco. The media still mentioned the name Charles Hernandez, but no longer as a tech mogul, instead, as the anonymous founder behind a children's community fund. I knew that somewhere he was still watching. Maybe in a small cafe in Florence, a mist-covered station in Switzerland, or a place whose name I'd never known. He was still alive quietly, freely. Ethan sometimes called reporting that the Titan system had been permanently erased. Elena, once the devoted housekeeper, was now executive director of the Foundation's New York branch. Everything seemed settled. Everything except me. I still hadn't learned how to be genuinely at peace. One golden June afternoon, I was invited to a photography exhibition titled Echoes of Light, a collection by an anonymous artist. Elena's message read, "You should go, Natalie. There's something you need to see." The gallery tucked in Boston's South End smelled of fresh wood and clean light. On the walls hung dozens of photos capturing ordinary beauty. A child smiling in the Florence rain, an old hand holding a cup of tea, a forgotten piano in a railway hall. Then I stopped at the 13th frame. It showed a man from behind white shirt standing by the Arno, a camera in his hand, sunlight spilling over his shoulders like a blessing. Beneath it was a single caption: "To the woman who taught me that even silence can be love." I couldn't breathe. Every cell in my body seemed to sing aching, joyful disbelieving. A young woman approached. "This one came from Florence," she said. The artist left no real name, only the initials CH. It was mailed to us without a return address. I smiled, warmth spreading through my chest. C.H. Charles Hernandez. He had kept his promise. That night, I came home late. Boston hadn't slept. The summer wind carried the scent of rain through the open window. I turned on the light and set the photograph beside the old postcard. Two minor things heavier than 1,000 words. I made a cup of tea, then played Clair de Lune, the melody that had always tied us together. At the first notes, my heart trembled. I closed my eyes and saw him, white shirt, tired, smile calm. Eyes like the first day we met in Boston, when rain fell, as if the whole world were dissolving. I once thought love had to end in happiness or heartbreak, but now I know some loves don't need an ending because they were never meant to say goodbye. A month later, I flew to Florence for an international charity conference. Walking along the Arno that morning, I heard piano music drifting from a small cafe. I didn't know why, but my heart raced. The melody Clair de Lune is still played with new notes, which are softer and gentler like a final verse. I stepped inside. There were only a few people. Sunlight streamed through the windows onto a man in the corner, white shirt fingers gliding over the keys. He looked up. Those gray eyes met mine, no longer cold or burdened, but warm and genuine as morning light. No words, only a smile, and the music continued. I walked closer, sat beside him, and touched the third key. "You still play the wrong note here," I whispered. "I never wanted to fix it," he said softly. We needed no more words. Because some homecomings don't need warning, only two hearts still beating to the same melody. That afternoon, Florence was drenched in sunlight. We wandered through cobbled streets and stopped by a cafe near Piazza della Signoria. Charles told me he'd left New York to wipe tight and clean, then stayed in Italy living through photography. He said I thought I'd disappeared, but I was circling back to where it began. I smiled. And I never went anywhere. I just stayed still, waiting. He took my hand, the one that had once dressed his wound, now healed and gentle. "And you've won." We fell silent. In the distance, the bells of Santa Maria rang 6 times, mingling with the wind. Everything was so calm that time seemed to pause, not to remember, but to breathe. A year later, the Hera Foundation opened a branch in Florence. At the opening ceremony, I saw him standing at the back, still in a white shirt, still with that gaze. But this time, he wasn't hiding. The press captured that moment, calling it the rebirth of a legend. But to me, it was simply the man who once chose silence and finally found his voice. That night, we stood by the Arno under a spilling moon. Charles said softly, "I used to think love meant holding on. I know love means letting go, yet we are still walking together." I looked at him and replied, "I used to think love meant waiting. Now I know it's when the one you waited for comes back and you're still here." He smiled and pulled me close. And here we still are. We stood there for a long time in the hush of water and light. A long chapter had closed, without noise, without tears. Only peace, as two souls that had wandered finally found their way home. I don't know what the future holds, but I know this love doesn't need to be perfect to be real. We've walked through storms, loss, and separations that felt endless. Yet if I had to choose again, I'd still choose to walk into that storm to meet him one more time. Thank you for journeying with me through Natalie and Charles's story. If you believe true love can find its way back, leave a comment to let me know you're still here, share where you're reading this from, and don't forget to follow the channel to hear more stories, where every wound can one day become a beautiful piece of music. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel and share your thoughts below. Every comment is a spark that helps future stories come alive and reach even more hearts.